Man, that opening always brings back memories of simpler times. When the Elder Scrolls Oblivion first dropped, I could not get enough of the game. I was glued to my screen for hours, like I'm sure many of you were. We can't deny the impact Oblivion had on RPGs, and I mean, just gaming as a whole. But as I've gotten older and ingested more media and forms of storytelling, I wanted to go back. I wanted to see if Oblivion still lived up to my memory, if the story really was amazing, or perhaps I was just more complacent when I was younger. Were the events really impactful? Did I feel like the hero? And does this almost 20-year-old game storytelling and narrative design live up to modern games and media that we see today? Hey everyone, and welcome to Game Narrative. Today, we'll be going through the Elder Scrolls Oblivion's main storyline. We'll be breaking the game up into parts, where I will recount the story of our journey, and then give some feedback on the storytelling and narrative designs. However, I want to clear up exactly what we'll be focusing on today, because Oblivion is just a massive game. To cover everything the world has to offer would take us tons of hours, so let's just go ahead and set some ground rules. First, we'll only be looking at the main story and the progression of the main path. We won't be diving into any of the guild storylines like the amazing Dark Brotherhood quest line and becoming the listener, or how we go from a nobody to stealing a literal freaking Elder Scroll and becoming the Grey Fox. We also won't be covering the story of the Shivering Isles or Knights of the Nine DLCs. I know, I'm sorry my fellow Sheogorath heads, but maybe we'll come back to Oblivion DLCs in the future and do deep dives on those specifically in their stories. Second, we're not going to be covering the wider world of Tamriel and the deep lore surrounding the territories and the histories of the land. This includes events of the previous and future games. The Elder Scrolls has an amazingly rich world with years of design and world building that covers just endless lore, creating this massive fabric of interwoven stories. Because of that, we really have to narrow down our scope and make sure we're just talking about the Elder Scrolls Oblivion's main storyline. And how we're going to be doing that is we're going to be breaking up the story into parts, and each part will go through the main story beats. After the short story recap, I'll go ahead and give my opinions from a writing and design point of view. The design side is more how I feel the story is being delivered and received, and is it good from a game design point of view, or even what could they have done better. This should give a nice refresher for anyone who may have forgot some things and help me organize my thoughts while I write this whole script out. But before we jump right into it, if you do enjoy this type of content, try hitting the like button. If you agree, disagree on some of my points, or just think I'm unhinged, go ahead and leave a comment. You've all heard the YouTuber spiel before, so without further ado, let's unite the people against the Daedric threat and close shut the marble jaws of Oblivion.
Let me see your face.
We start off strong with a man and his personal bodyguards inspecting our face at an uncomfortably close distance. He speaks in pseudo-riddles and saying he's seen our face in his dreams and our destiny is yet to unfold. We've been put in this place by the greater powers to help in the coming dark times. With the guards being on their guard. Get it? Guard?
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
While getting used to moving around, following the guards not as ordered, we're assaulted. An attempt to assassinate the Emperor fails, and due to the guards' wariness, we're left behind a door. No worries though, the friendly neighborhood rats break down the wall, freeing us of our shackles. We make our way through the old built-over ruins to run into our old friends. The Emperor stops the soldiers from cutting us down and asks us what stars we're born under. After telling him, he just believes us. He thinks we're the one he received a sign about, and informs us that his death is near, and would prefer us closed as we may yet prove an important figure to the world and powers at play. Continuing on with our merry bunch of friends, we find ourselves in an impasse. The gate is barred, and the only other way out is a dead end. We're assaulted again by assassins, told to guard the Emperor with our lives, a prisoner they just met. As the battle rages outside the hallway, Emperor Uriel Septim turns to us. He hands us his amulet, telling us it's crucial, and to seek out his last remaining bastard son Martin. To do so, we must venture to Joffrey at Wayne Priory. All of a sudden, an assassin opens the most convenient hidden wall and cuts down the Emperor before our very eyes. We take vengeance for the fallen liege, and Boris asks us about the amulet and the Emperor's final words. With that, we're sent off, out of the sewers and into the wider world, our quest officially starting. Now, I actually really like this introduction. Uriel Septim is a pretty mysterious figure and comes across that way, speaking in almost as if he's reciting divine prophecy in a reserved and eloquent kind of manner, but he also shows he's strong and fearless. I mean, he faces death head on and puts his faith in the greater powers, that everything's just going to be alright without him. We don't know anything about him, but because of Patrick Stewart's delivery, it gives off an air of comfort in a stressful hour of being hounded by assassins, and our potential escape from imprisonment. We're not talked to like we're players, and the dialogue feels like we're the character. Current events are being spoken of as this is just the world we live in. It is a very good practice in writing in books to give the feeling of immersion. People don't just dump exposition of the plot, and I think with how little screen time Uriel Septim has, it's a big reason why we remember him as a character, aside from him wanting to stare at our faces. And from the very beginning, we're told that this amulet is precious. It may be the key to the whole problem that we're about to solve. As long as it stays with the Septim heir, the world has a chance. It's great that the plot is clearly defined, especially in the beginning, that we just need to find the Septim, bring him the amulet, and the world will be alright. And this is established, like I said, from the very beginning as the central point of the entire storyline.
No one but the Emperor is permitted to handle the amulet.
We set off on our calling, heading to Wayne Priory. We easily find Joffrey, who at first is pretty suspicious we know of the Emperor's death, but quickly comes to believe us as we deliver the amulet and the Emperor's final words. Joffrey quickly puts together that the Emperor could only mean Tamriel is in danger from the Daedric Prince, Mehrunes Dagon, master of the realm of Oblivion. He procures the Amulet of Kings from us and informs us that Martin, the last living heir, resides in Kvatch as a humble priest of Akatosh. We are to bring him to Wayne Priory at the utmost. Because the Daedra may already be aware of Martin's presence, it's best if we leave the Amulet of Kings in Joffrey's very capable hands. For if they get their hands on the amulet, the consequences would be dire.
Foreshadowing is a literary device, and
knowing that the Amulet of Kings that the Emperor himself told us to protect with our lives is safe, we set off for Kvatch in the south. However, on our arrival, we notice a camp of refugees. A man sprints from the area to warn us that the Daedra are pouring out and sacking Kvatch. Almost everyone is already dead, and flee while we can. Just get out, man, get out. So we ignore that and continue up the slope. The skies redden, thunder breaks overhead, and sounds of churning magic energy resonate down the hillside. We find a group of soldiers holding the line in the face of the Daedra threat. We speak to the captain, who informs us Martin was last seen inside the city, leading survivors to the Temple of Akatosh, and from what he knows, he may already be dead. Our only way to find out, though, is to venture into Oblivion itself to see if we can ebb the tide of Daedra by closing the gate. We enter the realm of Oblivion to find a survivor. He tells us more soldiers were carried to the tower. So, we fight our way through the demonic forces up the tower itself, finding a prisoner who informs us that the central tower is key. The portal is being held open by Sigil Stone. We leave the man who could probably fit through the bars as the Doom soundtrack blasts in our ears as we must slay all the Daedra. We fight our way up through the tower, finally revealing the Sigil Stone and yanking it from its precipice, closing shut the first Oblivion gate. The soldiers outside the gate of Kvatch are astonished that the feat could be done. They begin to praise us, but there's no time. Survivors still may reside in the temple, and we must learn about Martin's whereabouts before it's too late. We muster the remaining guard and push our way through the remaining forces outside the church. Luckily, we are able to find Martin, but he's broken and despondent. He tells us his prayers fell on deaf ears and the gods turned their back on them in their greatest time of need. We inform him, "Shut up, you are in fact the son of the last emperor, come with us, we have no time to explain." Logically, he doesn't immediately believe us, but because the people he ushered to the temple are now safe, he decides to join us back to Wayne Priory and hear us out. With Martin in tow, we travel back to good old Wayne Priory, the screams of the villagers resonating as we arrive. Aronor tells us they're under attack and he thinks someone might be behind them. Joffrey was last seen praying in the chapel. The attackers don the same vestments as the Emperor's assassins, and we fight our way through to save Joffrey in time. He informs us that the Amulet of Kings that was kept secret in a hidden room has been stolen. At least, Martin's alive. Wayne Priory is no longer safe, so listening to the wise words of Joffrey, we retreat back to Cloud Ruler Temple north of Bruma. Alright, I really like that the story has had a very consistent pace. It has been very much like, let's just go. Joffrey puts the cryptic meaning of the Emperor's words into the most plausible, yet not the craziest theory, actually, that Mehrunes Dagon himself is making moves against Tamriel, and perhaps the one behind the organized efforts against the Septim bloodline. As to why exactly that is remains kind of a mystery. Joffrey comes across as an extremely competent member of the Blades, having served as the personal bodyguard of Uriel and knowing him well, even to become the Grand Master of the Blades and deliver Martin safely and watch him over the years. But honestly, it does make sense that the Amulet of Kings would be safer in his possession as we locate Martin. After all, we're just some guy that smells like sewer water and he's a seasoned veteran. The whole walk up to Kvatch is also amazing. The way the Oblivion Gate changes the landscape and the refugee survivors at the base of the mountain clearly indicates that something bad is going on, and that's only further pushed when the Mad Lad telling you to run away from the Daedra and that they're overrunning the place and the whole city is gone. It just kind of gives the player urgency. Time doesn't feel like it's on your side, and you may be too late, so you're just pushed to help in any way you can. Not only for Martin, but seeing all these people left without a home and the fear that's shaken them kind of just drives you to just want to push on. I'm not going to dive deeply on Oblivion Gates. I mean, they're great narrative devices, and the plot of the game kind of drives this into you, and they make events actually feel like a crisis with them popping up over the landscapes. But for the most part, they're hack and slash gameplay loops and don't really influence the story while inside the realms of Oblivion. So because we're looking at the story and narrative design and not the repetitive game mechanic of closing gates, these are getting a higher score. After closing the gate of Kvatch, seeing the faces on the soldiers and them praising you for your feat is an almost amazing feeling. You feel like you're actually impacting the world, and this feeling carries on. Random NPCs in the world will even just refer to you as the hero of Kvatch. You feel like you've gained respect through your actions, and this carries on for the whole game. You as a player feel like your actions are changing the landscape, and you feel like you can bring hope to a world that's about to face one of its hardest trials. Martin is another example of an amazing character. When we find him, he's broken. His faith in the gods is at rock bottom. I mean, he believes they turn their back on them, and it's really fucked up of them if this is all part of their greater plan. He doesn't immediately believe us about being the son of the Emperor, and I mean, why should he? That's perfectly reasonable. No one receiving that information would be like, oh, cool, yeah, that makes sense, bow nerds. But because he has nothing left in Kvatch and the flock he protected are finally safe, he feels he can just come with us. There's no downside. All his loved ones are pretty much dead, and, let's see where this leads. And moving on to the fail. Alright, Joffrey, come on, man. I just talked you up in, a couple paragraphs ago. Why just leave the most precious amulet, literally delivered by a deity to an ancient bloodline, in a box? I get it, and it does drive the story forward. I mean, we need the MacGuffin, but there could be some argument that it would be safer hidden, but, I don't know, man. It also does show knowledge and power that the Mythic Dawn are capable of if they're able to locate the amulet and assault Wayne and Priory with no consequences. So, I mean, I guess I can't give Joffrey too hard of a time, but it hurts a little bit. I kind of like to think of the Amulet of Kings in a similar vein to the One Ring. Not that it's malicious and calls out to the Dark Lord, but it's just an incredibly potent artifact, and once it's been discovered that it's no longer in the Emperor's possession, I feel like tracking it down using mysticism or some form of magic probably wouldn't be the most difficult task for a skilled sorcerer. Lastly, I want to cover this important bit. Arriving at Cloud Ruler Temple really sets up the fact that we are not the main character. The Blades pledging their service to the new Dragonborn Emperor is an incredible scene, but we're not the main focus. And this isn't a bad thing. Martin is set up as the main character. He's the one that has the destiny to stop the great evil of Mehrunes Dagon and his approach to enter Tamriel, but in order to do so, he needs us. We're the key to getting the Amulet of Kings back, and without that, there is no stopping the Daedric Prince. it's a really cool dichotomy that they managed to put us in, where we aren't the main character, we're not the Neravine, we aren't the Dragonborn, we're just us, but we don't feel like a side character either. We're integral to stopping the entire crisis, putting us up directly against the Mythic Dawn as our enemy, while Mehrunes Dagon is Martin's enemy. I just really like the way how they portray Martin while still making us an important figure, and we're not just like a sideline person watching the cool stuff happen. With Martin securely under guard at Cloud Ruler Temple in the capable hands of Joffrey, we travel to the Imperial City to meet up with our old pal Boris. He's been doing a little digging on the cult and may have uncovered some interesting news. We find him chilling in a bar as we approach, and he tells us this dude's been watching him and to go sit down and play it cool. He's gonna walk up, guy's gonna follow, we're gonna follow, gank his ass in the basement. Can do. We do just that. Boris reveals that the guy following him is an agent of the Mythic Dawn, and this is confirmed when we loot a book off of his body written by some guy named Mankar Cameron and the Mythic Dawn commentaries. Boris also says he was looking into this cult, and there's an expert on said cult conveniently at the Mages Guild inside the Imperial City. Boris sends us on our way, and we follow up with Tarmina, who graciously lets us borrow book 2 of 4 in the series. She also gives a little more insight into who Mankar Cameron is, and lastly, she suggests we should scope out a bookstore called the First Edition. She believes that book 3 or 4 could be purchased here. As we make our way to the First Edition, the shop owner tells us that he does have the 3rd book, but it's already been ordered by some dweeb named Gwyneth. Said dweeb comes right into the store and buys it. As he does so, we confront him, telling him the Mythic Dawn are behind the Emperor's assassination. Digesting that information, he promptly shits his pants and gives us the book. And then he also conveniently tells us, hey, the 4th book needs to be received by a member of the Mythic Dawn, so here's a meeting location I set up with him. This leads Boris to tell us that he weirdly knows the sewers well. Too well, in fact. So well, in fact, he's actually remembered the decorum and was baffled why someone put a table down there. Boris, man, what are you... Never mind. To the sewers! Because we know talk good, we have Boris do the talking. Unfortunately, we also know sneak good either, and are quickly caught. Jumping into quick action, we slay the Mythic Dawn members, saving Sewerman Boris and collecting the final book. We deliver the complete set to Tarmina, wait around a bit, and she tells us it reveals a map that appears on a tomb at noon. Finding the giant glowing-ass tombstone, it was not much of an issue, and it tells us exactly where the Mythic Dawn hideout is. We set forth, taking us to a nice scenic cave on the outside of a small lake. Upon entering, we're greeted with open arms by fellow cultists. We're asked to drop off our equipment, and we do so, thinking we're being invited to the orgy. Successfully infiltrating the Mythic Dawn, we arrive at the shrine of Mehrunes Dagon, with Mankar Cameron himself bearing the Amulet of Kings. Although it's short-lived, Mankar Cameron dips into a portal after reading from his book. We fly into action and attempt to stop him and reclaim the amulet. We take down his cultists and free the Argonian trapped. A strange book, the Mysterium Xarxes, resides on the altar where Cameron stood. So, we yoink the shit out of that and get out of Dodge, back to Cloud Ruler Temple. Upon arriving, we deliver the book to Martin and let him know of Mankar Cameron's disappearance with the Amulet of Kings and his so-called Realm of Paradise. Alright, let's break this part down. From a mechanic point of view, this can be really tedious, just a lot of running around and talking to people, but if we take a step back approach, looking at it purely from the story, I think it does a good job. You feel like a pseudo-detective tracking down these books and learning everything we can of the Emperor's assassins, and leading up to a confrontation with the mysterious leader Mankar Cameron that was built up over the previous section of finding the books. It's not action-packed hack and slash, but it also doesn't feel boring. Like, we're actually learning about the cult slowly, building a profile, and as we speak to Boris and Tarmina, we really start to develop a picture in our head of what the Mythic Dawn is. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of the giant glowing tomb at noon in a fairly public place. It kind of breaks a little bit of that immersion. It reveals a secret cult location and feels like someone should have seen or heard about it and possibly even reported on it, or maybe a rumor people are just talking about, is this new? Has this always done this maybe? But for how long? It probably could have been handled better to guide us to the location instead of a giant flaming symbol, but it does serve its purpose. Maybe if I could go back in time, I would suggest this is what starts our hunt for the Mythic Dawn, and the books are the clues that lead us to location. Because maybe it has been around for a long time and people are aware of it, so no one's just talking about it, but the cult uses that to kind of plan where they are. The cult itself is interesting. Mankar Cameron does promise some great rewards to the willing people that serve, and he even plays on the fears of the Oblivion crisis, and while playing on those fears, it gives his words credence. He shows his power, and it's easy to see why people are following him and building the Mythic Dawn. Now back to our main boy Martin. By the time we actually deliver the Mysterium Xarxes, we see that Martin's becoming more comfortable with his new life. I mean, he's not fully convinced yet that he's the heir to the Septim bloodline, and he's not too sure he'll make a good emperor, but with all that said, he sees the respect that the Blades are showing him, and he strives to be better to build confidence. Like, he actually shows growth and not incompetency.
Stop right there, criminal scum! Nobody.
As Martin transcribes the Mysterium Xarxes, it's time for some fetch quests. But first, we have to deal with some would-be spies of the Mythic Dawn. Tracking these spies down isn't too hard, as one stands right outside the gates and the other one is conveniently in town. After the spies are dealt with, a Oblivion gate is opened up outside the city of Bruma, and we speak with the captain of the guard, Bird. Bird wants to know how to close an Oblivion gate in the event that he can do it himself if the need arose and he can teach others. We're the ones tasked with assisting in this and teaching them, as we're the heroes of Kvatch. We have the most experience out of anyone else on Tamriel currently for closing the gates. So, we happily oblige, taking Bird and his men deep into the plane of Oblivion to shut down the gate that's looming outside Bruma. Shutting down the Oblivion gate outside Bruma solidifies our relationship with both Bruma and the Countess. And with that, we head back up the mountain to Joffrey and Martin. Martin gives us the beginning of the fetch quests. First, he'd like us to obtain an artifact from a Daedric prince, the closest one being Azura's star. Before we head off to see the Daedric prince Azura, Joffrey informs us that the threat of the Oblivion gates is growing. New gates are spawning around major cities around the country, and they all call for aid. Repeating what we did for Bruma would unite the people and train more brave soldiers to endure the plains of Oblivion. We're tasked with venturing to the main holds to speak with their leaders and insist in any way we can while Martin transcribes the Mysterium Xarxes. For the running around to every single individual hold, we do skip that in this playthrough, but don't worry, I do cover the story and design implications of this very much in depth later on. So with that, our first Daedric artifact. We choose Azura's Star as it's pretty straightforward and near the Mythic Dawn hideout, which is just convenient. So we venture to the shrine, commune with Azura at dusk, and promptly complete her task. With that, we're rewarded the Azura Star, and we quickly return the artifact to Martin, who in the meantime has learned the next ingredient. As with the Daedric influence, we need the opposite, Divine Blood. Joffrey reveals that Tiber Septim's blood was dried on his armor, but unfortunately his tomb is cursed. However, with little choice, he does just give us the key and request we reclaim the armor. With ancient key in hand, we travel to Sancre Tor, final resting place of Tiber Septim. As we make our way inside, we find the remains of 4 different Blades members, each who served Tiber Septim. The first Blade that we release tells us that he was sent to pay homage to Tiber Septim, but unfortunately, the Underking, a Dark Master, put a curse on the area, binding their souls and entrapping the place in darkness. Thankfully though, the Underking is long gone, so we mostly just need to lay their bones to rest and free their spirits. And with their power combined, they're able to dispel the ancient darkness of the Underking. We claim the armor of Tiber Septim and sacrilegiously wear the armor as we hop our way out of the crypt and return to Martin. Keeping up with the theme of fetch quests, Martin discovers the next recipe, a Greater Welkin Stone. It's revealed that one may yet reside in the ancient Iliad ruin of Miscarind. Now, while exploring the ruins of Miscarind, I do get lost more than I would like to admit. But that's mostly because I accidentally pushed the same button twice. But with the trials and tribulations, we do end up making our way to the antechamber, where the Great Welkin Stone resides. Upon retrieving it, we awaken the ancient king of Miscarind, which we promptly put back in the ground. With the ancient king dead and the Greater Welkin Stone in hand, we return back to Martin. With the Daedric artifact, the blood of Tiber Septim, and the Greater Welkin Stone, only one last item remains. As was before, we require the opposite of a Greater Welkin Stone. Welkin Stones being born of Mundus, we need something born of the Oblivion Plains. This leads Martin to a harebrained scheme that just might work. We need a greater sigil stone. And where do we get a greater sigil stone? Well, a greater Oblivion gate. Seems pretty straightforward, but how do we do that? Well, we have to lure one in by allowing 3 separate ones to open up in front of us. Here we use Bruma as bait. If you traveled around the countryside helping all the other holds close their gates, then they'll happily send aid to Bruma, lending you soldiers for luring in this gate. We convinced the Countess of Bruma to let us use her town as bait, and Martin himself rises to lead the people against the Daedric threat. We meet outside the gates of Bruma with a score of soldiers and Martin leading the charge. Martin gives a rousing speech as we wait for the first gate to open. One by one, the Daedric gates open, spewing forth hordes of Daedra that we have to cut down with our men in arms. Not too long after the third gate opens, the final great gate begins to open in front of our eyes. More Daedra continue to pour forth, but we take our opportunity and dive into the great gate. We have pretty good faith that the soldiers back there can hold off while we stop this one. As our eyes finally adjust to the plane of Oblivion, we see this monstrous-sized siege engine standing in front of us. Being on a timer, we ignore the terrifying siege engine, and we make our way through the Daedric fortress, hacking and slashing all the Daedric enemies with the Doom soundtrack blasting in our ears as we make our way all the way to the top. At the precipice of the tower, we rip the Greater Sigil Stone from its altar. The gate shuts and spews us back into the plane of Mundus. We see the siege engine was cut in half by the portal closing. Bodies lie around us in the field, both allies and enemies. Most importantly though, Martin survives, and we bring him the Greater Sigil Stone. With all the necessary ingredients in hand, we are able to open the portal to Paradise, where only Mankar Cameron stands on our way to relighting the dragon flames. So let's take a second to talk about fetch quests. Fetch quests aren't really fun. Normally it's a lot of back and forth, grab this, return this. I do like the concept behind these quests though, and every location we traveled to in Oblivion was pretty unique. Each area having its own history and little mini story we unravel. It felt like actual good progression, like it didn't just feel like we're running around fetching 10 bear asses and handing it to the closest guy for some gold pieces. Each item we were fetching was unique and it was a one-of-a-kind item, and the symmetry of every single item, like the Daedric artifact and the Divine Blood, and the Greater Welkin Stone and the Greater Sigil Stone. Aside from just like the symmetry in the items themselves, I think it also helps that the dungeons weren't particularly long either. It's not like a big slogfest trying to retrieve every single thing, except, I mean, maybe the Greater Sigil Stone, but that's only because you've done so many Oblivion gates by this point that, you're just kind of urged to get it through. But even with that said, I mean, the Greater Oblivion Gate has a pretty unique mechanic to it where it's actually timed and you're kind of rushed to get it done. While on the subject of Oblivion Gates, let's go ahead and talk about the holds and the individual gates. This can feel extremely tedious and time consuming, exact opposite of what I was talking about previously. However, I will say the payoff is awesome. As you progress, you make allies around Cyrodiil, and it ties back in this feeling that you're making a difference. Kind of similar to the beginning of the game where you are the hero of Kvatch, you become the hero of all these individual holds. And by the time it comes to the end, everything just kind of lines up and comes together with soldiers of every single faction representing their holds and helping in the defense of the Great Gate. It really is a great feeling of accomplishment. Like, you see your hard work and have like the tangible effects on the world and how you're affecting current events. On top of just the story payoff, it also affects the likelihood of people like Boris and Joffrey surviving the final confrontation. And then completely not related to story, but mechanically, it just makes the 3 gates that appear easier to handle. The downside is it does suck doing all the individual gates, but from a narrative view, it's truly awesome. My only real gripe here is that I just kind of wish they leaned into it a bit more. Like, I think there was a lot of potential to really get to know the holds, the counts and countesses, some more of that like intrigue and dynamic of the noble families, but at the same time that could also cause like more slowdowns and be a little bit of a headache if it's not handled well. But aside from just the raw tedium of that, another thing I do want to point out here again for the 4th time I think is Martin. I know I've been talking about this dude the entire time, but honestly, like, remember when we first met him, he was like in shambles and he was on the border of losing his faith, but because of the faith of the people, like the Blades had for him, and even you yourself putting faith into him, he kind of grows in this role of a leader. And even seeing this in the scene when he's inspiring the brave soldiers and he's willing to fend off the Daedra for his suicide plan of luring the Great Gate, it's really cool seeing him move into this role of more than a protagonist and becoming the central focal point of the story.
This is the day. Gods give me strength.
With all the artifacts in tow, Martin completes the ritual, opening a gate to paradise. We step through to be greeted with the lush hills and vegetation of an island in a distant sea. Daedra and people alike walk freely, and the voice of Mankar Cameron enters our mind. He congratulates us on entering his domain, but whether we're chosen by fate or not, he welcomes us. He tells us, as he stood against the gods in defiance by slaying the Septim bloodline, so too will he gladly defy fate once more by ending us. Just as Mankar Cameron is our final goal, so too are we Mankar Cameron's final goal. We're his final obstacle to being reborn in Mehrunes Dagon's Tamriel. We venture through paradise. Mankar Cameron continues to goad us, asking us why we fight, telling us he's already won, and we brazenly walk into his seat of power thinking we can defeat him. As we continue, a Daedra by the name of the Daedra speaks to us, claiming his kin have spoken of us and we may either do battle or serve him, but beyond that, there is no further progression. Seeing as how I'm kind of a Daedra slaying fiend, we drop him pretty quick, looting the bands of Chosen off of his body, and we continue onward. We make our way into the grotto, fighting our way through a few Daedra that stand in our path until we meet Eldamil, someone who served Cameron, but in doing so, came to regret his choices and actions. He agrees to sever the binding of the bands of the Chosen placed on us, which will allow us to venture into Mankar Cameron's lair. After the binds are broken, we are accosted by Mankar's children, who beckon us to enter the Master's lair. We put the name of a mortal to test and blast them before heading to Mankar's domain, just kind of checking, and upon entering, his children end up flanking either side of him. Guess they are kind of immortal. He tells us this is the end. We are bound to his paradise and there's no way out. So we defy him. He grows in rage until the battle begins. We fight Mankar Cameron and his children again until we achieve victory. Paradise begins to crumble around us and we snatch the Amulet of Kings off his corpse as the demi-plane closes upon itself. We arrive back in Cloud Ruler Temple, Amulet of Kings in hand, as we give it to the rightful heir. Martin, who is still a bit unsure of his place in all this, dons the amulet, said to only be wearable by those of the Septim bloodline. Finally setting in the right place the rightful ruler of the Empire, we set off to the Imperial City to relight the Dragonfires. Upon entering the Imperial City, I'm promptly arrested for something I probably did a while ago and forgot about. But Martin is kind enough to wait my sentence out. Then we travel to the Gold White Tower where, oh no, what does this guy want? Come on, man. I'm just trying to, alright, fine, yeah, Rufio, whatever. Okay, now we enter the Imperial Palace, where Chancellor Okado is waiting to meet with us. As Martin and Okado prepare plans to reinstate Martin as the Emperor, an Imperial messenger bursts into the room. The Imperial City is under attack by the Daedra. They're literally besieging the capital. In a desperate attempt to stop the incursion, we must make our way to the Temple District to relight the Dragonfires. But when we arrive, it's too late. Mehrunes Dagon has entered the material plane. With no hope left, we turn to Martin, who shares our grief. But suddenly a plan comes to mind. Martin believes that there's still something we can do. So he asks us to cover him. And we do. We cover him from Mehrunes Dagon himself and his minions as we make our way to the Temple of Akatosh. From there, the roof is ripped from the foundations. Martin standing in the center, he smashes the Amulet of Kings, fusing his blood with the divine and turning into the aspect of Akatosh. Mehrunes Dagon and Martin battle it out. Mehrunes slashes into the Avatar, but the Avatar bites back. As the battle draws on, eventually the Avatar grips Mehrunes and blasts it with holy fire, banishing the Daedric Prince back to the plane of Oblivion, closing shut the marble jaws of Oblivion once and for all. All that remains of the late Emperor is the statue manifestation of Akatosh. All Daedra were banished, and thanks to Martin's sacrifice, the day was won. Jumping back to the beginning of part 5, Mankar Cameron is interesting. When we first arrived at Paradise, we know very little of him, but as we traverse his realm, he opens up, sharing his morals, his belief, his philosophy on fate and the plans of the gods, and whether you care about that or not, it is just interesting that we hear his point of view and his side as much as we can. And even when we continue to traverse his realm, we see this sick side of him, where he's punishing his believers, and those that dare defy him end up in cages dipped in lava, only to be brought back again and again. It really shows the depravity and cruelty of a villain we know so little about beforehand, but it makes our conviction stronger that Mankar Cameron must die. In the story of Oblivion, Martin is the main character, and Mehrunes Dagon is the primary villain. But in our subset, in our world, to ensure Martin can claim victory, or our own personal villain, set up from the very beginning in the prison is Mankar Cameron and the entire Mythic Dawn. We're both the side characters to the greater story, but both play infinitely valuable roles on each side of the conflict. Now to the actual Daedra invasion and traveling through the Imperial City. Despite the good old Oblivion jank of being arrested and chased down by Lucian, having Martin finally reach his goal and being the confident leader the people desperately need, only to be interrupted by the invasion of Daedra it's a super hectic feeling. You want to protect Martin and you want to save the city. I mean, you're the hero of Kavach and Bruma and all the other holds, and you're also just a member of the Blades. Then, as you battle your way through, only to see Mehrunes Dagon appear in the capital, that just feeling of, oh shit, washes over you. Martin creates a play for one last move, and you make it your mission to see him to that temple, even attacking a freaking Daedric prince head on, just so you can move his attention away from Martin. The final battle itself playing out, you're just in awe. I mean, there's no cutscenes in the game aside from the very beginning cinematic, but this is pretty damn close. And as the battle's kind of happening, you see the full cycle of Martin's story kind of play out. From the broken priest to self-sacrificing emperor. You feel something, knowing he does what he has to do, and the payoff of all your labor is just definitely worth the ending. Oblivion is more than just the main story. I mean, what we saw and covered here today is just a fraction of what the game offers. But the respect they give the player for going out of their way and completing these tasks for the story is just a super rewarding journey. They don't bog you down with exposition and lore dumps, making sure you know every single aspect of what you're doing, but instead they treat you respectfully, even making the boring parts have some sort of payoff, or at least when it comes to fetch quests, they make them interesting in their own way. Completing the main story of Oblivion never felt like a chore while I was redoing this playthrough, and I didn't feel like I was doing it out of necessity. I was doing it because I could see the effect my actions had, and I genuinely just wanted to keep playing. I wanted to dive into ruins and collect ancient artifacts. I wanted to see Martin grow, and probably most importantly, the entire journey was just fun. There was never a time where I rolled my eyes as I waited for people to explain to me, the player, why I needed to do what I was doing. Everything was geared towards the character, and I was immersed. I played through the entirety of the story in one sitting for my live stream on Twitch, and again, I wasn't forced to. I was genuinely engaged in the story, and that's not something I can say about many games. Oblivion's story is good because it respects your time investment. There's urgency about the actions you take throughout the game. There's great characters that grow with the narrative. The world is rich and full of lore that can be expanded on, and the overall story flows and is written well. For a 20-year-old game, I think this answers the question that we posed at the very beginning, that is Oblivion's story actually good? Yeah, I think so. With that all said and done and out of the way, there's one thing I do like to do at the end of these videos, and that's to rank the actual games compared to other games we have played on this channel. I break the game down into 4 key parts, and then I give them a score out of 10. We then combine their total score, and that places them on a tier list. So, without further ado, let's just jump into it. First category, the overall story. Was the story good or enjoyable? Was there a good flow to the progression? And did it make sense? Overall, yeah. I think the story writing itself plays out really well. It keeps you engaged, and even the parts that are supposed to be boring do a great job of really standing out. It's a rewarding storyline, and my only gripes are that I wish they did more to incorporate the story when gaining aid for Bruma and doing the Oblivion gates, and also maybe expanding more on Mankar Cameron before entering Paradise. Because it was so solid though, I'm giving it an 8 out of 10. Second up, world building. Did the main story do a good job of building the world around the plot? Was I immersed, and did the world feel alive? Again, overall, yeah. The Oblivion Crisis really drives home the fact that the world is in trouble. Everyone is feeling the effects of the main storyline, and as I mentioned previously, there were some places I wish they expanded on to really drive this part home, but when it comes to world building, The Elder Scrolls has such a rich history of lore, factions, deities, prominent figures. It's easy to be immersed in the world. This part also gets an 8. Number 3, character development. Did the characters we met along the way grow, learn new lessons, have a more profound impact on the main story, and become driving forces for completing our own goals? Now, as much as I talked about Martin throughout this entire game, I do feel like he was the main standout character. The other characters that we kind of met along the way didn't really get the same level of growth or treatment, but still did well in their own ways and didn't feel one-dimensional. But Martin himself is just an amazing example of character development. He ticks every single one of those boxes. However, Martin stands out far and away from the norm. Like, take for instance Joffrey. There isn't a massive amount of growth, but like I said earlier, he doesn't feel one-dimensional, and neither does our sewer friend Boris, but neither would I say do they grow, really. Kind of the same thing can be said for Mankar Cameron. He opens up a bit, but it would have been much better to learn more about him and see his descent into madness more represented. But character development, again, gets an 8, mostly carried by Martin. And the fact everyone isn't just cardboard. Following up the rear, our last section, player urgency. How do we impact the world around us? Do we feel like we're making good strides? Like, are we growing in power, forging lasting relationships? How engaged in the story were we? Oblivion delivers on player urgency extremely well. Nothing you do in the game feels like a waste of time, and everything furthers the plot in the right direction. While you don't have much choice overall in like what things you do or like kind of the path you take, the path you do go down makes waves and delivers an amazing payoff. I'm giving player urgency a 9 out of 10. With 3 8s and a 9, that brings our final score of Oblivion's story to a total of 33 out of 40, placing it firmly in A on our tier list. So with that, I would just like to thank everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed the content. Let me know what you'd like to see in our next story deep dive. I am kind of thinking about doing Morrowind, but I'm really itching to play something like Dragon Age. That way I can prepare for Veilguard coming out next month. But yeah. What are your thoughts on the Oblivion story? Am I completely unhinged? Am I just rambling on for no reason? Let me know. Any constructive criticism or just your opinions on the Oblivion story would be awesome to hear. So drop a comment down below, and thanks everyone. And if you made it this far, please subscribe to the channel because there's going to be a lot more of these. Game Narrative out.